What's up, Hunter? If you've already died 1,000 times on Wall of Storms and are still barely escaping the island, this video is for you. Today I brought 10 advanced Pass the Fear tips that I used to ignore at first. I'm Matthew, and the video starts right now. Look, I'm going to tell you a truth that completely changed my runs in Pass the Fear. Creating transmutation chains is by far the most addictive and absurd way to scale damage I've ever seen in this roguelite. Every time I grab two weapons and start messing around with opposing or complementary elemental modifiers, I get that butterflies in the stomach feeling of, now it's going to get crazy. It's not just putting fire on one and ice on the other, it's literally building a time bomb that chain explodes and multiplies damage in a way that feels glitched, but is 100% intentional. The trick is simple in theory and brilliant in practice. You throw one element on your primary weapon and the opposing or complementary one on your secondary. Fire plus ice, acid plus electric, bleed plus corrosion. Any combination the game recognizes as a reaction. When the bullet from the first weapon hits and applies the status, the second weapon triggers the transmutation, and boom, the chain reaction starts. I've seen enemies melting in a cascade just because I alternated shots at the right timing. It's like the game rewards you for thinking about synergy instead of just stacking the same element. At first I was stubborn and went mono element because I thought it was safer. The result? Linear damage, bosses taking an eternity, and me dying of boredom and bullets. The day I decided to force the transmutation chain, my build became a whole different beast. Damage stops being additive and becomes exponential. A single well-placed hit can trigger 3-4 reactions in a row, and the whole screen vanishes into particles. It's the kind of feeling that makes you shout alone in your room. If you're not doing this yet, stop everything and test it right now. Pick two weapons, force the opposing and complementary elements, and keep an eye on the moment transmutation triggers. When the chain starts running, you'll understand why I say this is one of the strongest ways to scale damage in the game. Then come back here and tell me if you got addicted too, because I can't play any other way anymore. In Pass the Fear, assembling a build with cooldown reduction and energy generation turns the game into a cycle of constant pressure, and that gives a delicious feeling of control. Instead of waiting for the right moment, you create the moment all the time. What catches my attention the most here is the synergy between high-level passives and the active ability of your primary weapon. When those pieces click together, it feels like the game rewards your aggressiveness with even more aggressiveness. I like this type of build because it doesn't just increase damage, it also changes your mental rhythm. You start playing with the mindset of keeping the gear spinning without stopping. In practice, this type of infinite ultimate loop is strong because it solves two problems at once: damage and consistency. The more you reduce cooldown and the more energy you generate, the less time exists between one screen clear and another. This makes your run much more stable because you can answer hordes, elites, and bosses with the exact same tool that remains constantly available. And personally, I think this is the type of build that fits best with a good roguelike game. It is born from small decisions, but in the end, it feels like you hack the system. You start out just wanting to press ultimate more often, and end up with a loop machine that dominates the entire combat. It's an advanced tip that really makes sense for anyone who wants to move beyond the basics and play at the level where Pass the Fear shines the brightest. Chaos Battle Scars aren't just those difficulty modifiers you activate to suffer more, they are actually a loot farming tool when used correctly. Each scar comes with a boon and a curse, and the smart play isn't to avoid the curse, but to intentionally choose the one that your current build can completely negate. Let me give you a practical example. If you're running a build with absurd health regeneration or shield-based defense, it makes no sense at all for you to take a curse that reduces your healing by 50%. Now, if you have a movement speed and range damage build, maybe that curse that increases enemies' melee damage is completely irrelevant to you. The point is, read what the curse does and consider whether it actually affects you. This sounds obvious, but in the heat of the run, we end up clicking whatever looks like the lesser evil without realizing we're wasting an opportunity. And here's the part that really matters. The higher the difficulty level you can sustain, the better the rare drop rates get. In roguelikes, the game's economy is simple. Higher risk, higher reward. But the trick isn't simply to suffer more for the sake of suffering. It's to suffer intelligently. If you can tank a specific curse without feeling almost anything, you are effectively farming premium difficulty for free. It's almost as if the game is paying you for something you were already doing anyway. This is what separates those who escape the island before dawn from those who get stuck in the middle loop. In the endgame, you aren't testing builds anymore. You are optimizing efficiency. Choosing the curse your build negates isn't an exploit. It's literally the game's design rewarding you for knowing your own setup. So next time that Battle Scars screen pops up, don't think about what you can endure. Think about what you can ignore completely. That is true mastery in Pass the Fear. This tip makes a lot of sense, as the game really presents itself as a roguelite bullet hell shooter, so reading projectile patterns matters more than trying to force your way through brute power. And based on how the game is described and shown, boss fights seem to demand exactly this kind of discipline, focusing on fine positioning control instead of wild dodges. What I like most about this approach is that it completely changes how you view the fight. Instead of frantically searching for the perfect window to dash, you start thinking like you're in a classic SHMUP, observing the hail of bullets, memorizing the pattern, and making micro-adjustments to thread the needle between projectiles. This usually works better when the boss is more stationary and the danger lies in the pattern itself, rather than long chases. In practice, I'd suggest treating the boss as a reading test, not a raw reflex test. If you try to spam long dashes all the time, you end up throwing yourself out of the arena's rhythm and lose more control than you gain. Whereas with small positional tweaks, you manage to stay alive longer while keeping your damage output steady. It's the kind of fight where survival depends more on composure than bravery, and that fits the game's chaotic identity perfectly. Learn the pattern, take a breath, and play like you're piloting an old-school SHMUP. When the boss turns into a wall of bullets, your goal isn't to escape it with a flashy dash, but to navigate through it with small, precise movements. Doing this stops the fight from feeling unfair and turns it into a highly aggressive dance, and that's when the game truly clicks. When you synchronize talent trees, the game stops being just about the character you chose and becomes about how they fit into the rest of the team. This gives a great sense of planning because every point spent starts to matter both for personal gain and for collective impact. I particularly love this kind of system because it rewards those who think about the team without stripping away the character's identity. You can make a hunter hit harder in terms of damage, but also turn that exact same hunter into someone who sustains the whole group with global buffs. In co-op, this becomes even stronger, because a choice that seemed small on an individual tree can become the detail that makes the entire team run much smoother. What makes this a truly advanced tip is balance. If you overdo personal buffs, you might end up with a strong character who fails to improve the team's momentum. If you dump everything strictly into global talents, you risk losing efficiency in your main role. The game really seems to value that middle ground between individual power and team utility, especially when playing with friends and needing every build to talk to one another. That's the part I respect most in a good roguelike. It doesn't just ask how much damage do you do, but also how do you help the team become absurd together. Synchronizing talent trees in Past the Fear delivers that exact vibe of smart build crafting, from someone who doesn't just want to survive, but wants to make the whole team scale together. It's the kind of decision that sounds technical, but inside the game turns into pure satisfaction. Let me tell you something that took me quite a few runs to figure out in Past the Fear. The tarot system isn't just that random bonus you pick up at the end of a room and forget about. Tarot cards are absurdly powerful, and how you assemble your starting deck dictates whether your run will be a smooth farm session or a desperate struggle for resources. I know the temptation to grab raw damage or health cards right away is strong, but pay attention to what happens when you prioritize critical chance and movement speed in the early chapters. At the start of the game, you are weak. Your shots take forever to kill, and the map is still full of scattered loot that you're probably leaving behind because there isn't enough time to pick it all up. That's where mobility comes in. With higher movement speed, you cover more ground, pick up more drops between waves, and can position yourself better to dodge those bullet hell patterns you aren't comfortable with yet. Critical hit chance, on the other hand, is basically an efficiency multiplier. You don't need more base damage if your hits are already deleting common enemies in one shot. The realization that flipped the switch for me was noticing that Past the Fear rewards those who accelerate their early farm more than those who try to survive with a defensive build early on. Killing faster means fewer enemies on screen, fewer projectiles to dodge, and more gold and weapon parts accumulated before the first boss. And more early gold means a better shop, which means earlier synergy, which means a snowball effect. It's a cascade effect starting from a simple critical card you grab in Chapter 1 that you wouldn't value if you didn't know this. So next time you open that tarot altar and see a speed or crit card next to something that looks safer, remember, you aren't choosing survival, you're choosing progression scaling. The run gets easy later when you have resources, not when you're tanking damage with your face. Trust the farm, trust the mobility, and let crit do the dirty work for you. One thing that completely changes co-op is stopping the every man for himself mindset and starting to actually pay attention to the DPS leaderboard. The game features an online mode for up to 4 players and systems that make combat pretty chaotic, so that telemetry screen isn't just a pretty set of numbers. It shows who is actually carrying the damage and who is just surviving in the middle of the mess. I started using this intentionally, and the entire run became much cleaner. What I do is simple. I open the telemetry mid-match and assign roles on the fly. Whoever is lower on the DPS leaderboard takes control of crowd management, focusing on crowd control, aggro, and utility to hold back the horde. Whoever is at the top inherits the raw damage modifiers, relic fusions, and affixes that push output to the extreme. This way you avoid that classic mistake where everyone picks damage items and nobody manages the arena. This works especially well because the game already has aggro mechanics, item trading, and even DPS battles, so the team composition directly responds to this split. When one player stays focused solely on control and the other becomes the damage machine, the bullet hell becomes far more readable. Fewer people dying in corners and more focus on what really matters, which is clearing the screen and keeping the run's momentum going. The tip here is to treat the DPS leaderboard as a decision dashboard, not an ego scoreboard. Look at the telemetry, adjust who holds the crowd and who takes the heavy damage modifiers, and co-op stops being 4 random builds competing against each other. It becomes a real team, and that's precisely where Pass the Fear gets significantly stronger in multiplayer. When I think about Pass the Fear, this tip about affixes is one of the ones that makes the most sense to me. I really love it when a roguelike rewards you for spotting hidden potential, rather than just picking up the highest rarity on display. Sometimes, the weapon that looks the humblest is the exact one coming with the right combination to turn into a damage machine. What I find coolest here is the logic behind how things fit together. Affixes like Growth, Final Shot, Embarkation, Shatter, and Disruption don't work better just because they look good on paper, but because they communicate with each other. When one effect triggers another, the build starts gaining its own momentum, and then damage stops being just a high number and becomes a chain reaction that scales on its own. In practice, this completely changes the way I play. Instead of just getting hyped over an epic weapon, I'd look at the whole package first. What activates what scales with what, and where the actual synergy lies. To me, this is the strongest mindset in a roguelike, because it forces you to think like a build craftsperson, not a loot collector. And that's precisely why this tip is so good. It teaches you that real power doesn't come solely from rarity, but from interaction. In a game like Pass the Fear, that's worth its weight in gold, because a clever combination can transform an ordinary run into something completely out of control. In the end, what seems like a minor detail becomes the core of your strength. I'll be honest with you. During my first few hours of Pass the Fear, I was one of those players who hoarded every single weapon part that dropped on the ground, thinking I'd need it later. Inventory full, loot glowing across the map, and there I was, afraid of breaking down the wrong piece. Then I discovered the Dismantle plus Forge system and realized I was leaving a fortune in upgrade tokens on the table. Breaking down weapons and parts that don't fit your build isn't a loss. It's an investment, and the gears you gain are far more valuable than that blue piece you're never going to equip. What changed the game for me was realizing the Forge isn't just a place where you upgrade what you already have. It's where you turn the run's trash into gold. You take that common rarity piece that doesn't match anything, dismantle it, grab the tokens, and apply them to the piece that actually matters to bump its rarity up. It's a recycling cycle that keeps your power steadily rising, even when RNG doesn't hand you exactly what you want. And here's the neat trick. There are relics that grant extra ember when you dismantle items, and tarot cards that can spawn a new item in the process. When you combine those two, the whole setup becomes a value generation engine. You're not just cleaning your inventory, you're farming resources with a multiplier. That useless piece turns into tokens, turns into extra ember, and still has a chance to generate a new piece that might be better than the original. It's like the game rewards you for being organized. I've had runs where the best item I equipped came directly from a dismantle I almost didn't do because I was too lazy to open the menu. So the tip I'm giving you, and one I wish I had learned sooner, is don't hoard, recycle. In every room, with every drop, ask yourself if that really belongs in your final build. If it doesn't, dismantle it without mercy. Combine the extra ember relic with the item spawn tarot and convert what would be trash into legitimate power. In the endgame of Pass the Fear, whoever optimizes every available resource is the one who survives until dawn. One of the things that annoys me most is seeing people treat their secondary weapon as if it were just an emergency button. Most people ignore it completely and just keep spamming their primary, but the game was designed specifically for you to use both actively. There are tarot cards that make your secondary fire automatically while you shoot with your primary, and that instantly takes the build to another level. What I do is separate their functions clearly. The secondary handles status effects: corrosion, stun, freeze, whatever comes up. The primary is dedicated strictly to raw damage. That way, you don't need to keep switching weapons in the middle of chaos. While your main melts the screen, your secondary applies the debuff non-stop, turning the fight into a walk in the park. It's the exact kind of synergy the game rewards heavily with affixes and relic fusions. In co-op, this becomes almost dirty with how strong it is. You turn into an invisible support. The team doesn't even notice, but everyone starts killing faster because enemies are permanently corrupted or stunned. Your placement on the DPS leaderboard climbs without you needing to steal anyone's kill, and the run becomes significantly more stable. I've seen entire teams get carried just because one player decided to build their secondary for status and leave their primary on damage autopilot. Stop treating your secondary like an accessory. Find the tarot that syncs it with your primary. Stack status effects on it, and leave your main to just burst numbers. It's already strong in single player. In co-op, it becomes top-tier DPS support without anyone even noticing you're carrying the team on your back.